Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Several new movies opened in theaters during the weekend that ended on June 9th, 2024, and two of them managed to get into this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office. And this weekend was a complete reversal of fortune for the overall domestic box office thanks to one of the new movies having a relatively decent domestic opening weekend. So while last weekend saw a 43.45% decline over the previous weekend's cumulative top 5 domestic box office earnings, this weekend's cumulative top 5 domestic box office earnings were a 77.96% increase over last week, with a total of around $86.4 million, which was also slightly higher than the total from 2 weeks ago. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please share the video on social media, please subscribe to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! And I'll once again first quickly go over the newest earnings for this year's 3 highest grossing movies so far. The highest grossing movie both domestically and worldwide so far this year remains Dune Part 2, whose theatrical run ended about 2 weeks ago. The movie earned a total of $282.1 million domestically and $429.6 million internationally, for a global gross box office total of $711.8 million. Thus, Dune Part 2 remains the only movie so far this year to surpass both the $600 million and $700 million marks in global gross box office revenue. It's also the only movie so far this year to earn more than $200 million domestically, which is rather sad when you think about it. With a production budget of $190 million, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $475 million to $570 million. Thus, Dune Part 2 has most definitely made bank. The second highest grossing movie for 2024, both domestically and worldwide, remains Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. So last weekend, no new box office had been reported before I made last week's video, but the movie did apparently earn some money that finally got reported. Thus, domestically, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire earned around another $344,000 last weekend, plus it earned around another $149,000 during this past week, to bring its current domestic box office total up to around $196.4 million. No new box office has been reported yet for this weekend, so I won't know until next weekend whether it earned anything else this weekend. Internationally, no new box office earnings have been reported, so the movie's current international box office total remains at $371.3 million. Thus, globally, the movie earned roughly another $149,000 to bring its current global gross box office total up to $567.7 million, allowing the movie to remain the highest grossing movie of all time worldwide, for the Godzilla and King Kong movies being produced by Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers. With its reported production budget of $135 million, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get an estimated break-even point ranging from $337.5 million to $405 million. Thus, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire has also made bank. The third highest grossing movie so far this year, both domestically and globally, is Kung Fu Panda 4. Domestically, no new box office earnings have yet been reported for the weekend, but the movie earned roughly another $56,000 domestically during last week, to bring its current domestic box office total up to $193.6 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $1.7 million to bring its current international box office total up to $351.2 million. So globally, the movie earned another $1.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $544.7 million. The movie has a production budget of only $85 million, which, when multiplied by 2.5, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of only $212.5 million. Thus, Kung Fu Panda 4 has also made bank. So this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office included the following. Bad Boys Ride or Die by Sony and Columbia Pictures opened in the number 1 position. But Sony and Columbia Pictures animated The Garfield Movie dropped to the number 2 position. Paramount Pictures' live-action/animated fantasy comedy movie entitled If fell to number 3 this weekend. New Line Cinema's low-budget horror movie The Watchers opened to the number 4 spot. And finally, the Disney and 20th Century Fox sequel, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, fell to 5th place. In terms of box office earnings, Bad Boys Ride or Die earned $56 million domestically and $48.6 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend box office total of $104.6 million, which isn't bad. The Garfield movie earned another $10 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $68.6 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $23.4 million to bring its current international box office total up to $124.1 million. So globally, the movie earned another $40.4 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $192.7 million. Domestically, the movie entitled If earned another $8 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $93.5 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $9.6 million to bring its current international box office total up to $67.2 million. So globally, the movie earned another $22.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $160.7 million. The Watchers earned $7 million domestically and $4.7 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend box office total of $11.7 million. And rounding out the top 5 movies, domestically, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes earned another $5.4 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $149.8 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $12.9 million to bring its current international box office total up to $210 million. So globally, the movie earned another $22.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $359.8 million, and remains only the 4th US-produced movie to break $300 million at the global box office so far this year. I'm also tracking several other movies that are no longer in the top 5, and they include the following. In only its 3rd weekend at the box office, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga by Warner Bros. Fell to the number 6 position. In its 6th weekend at the box office, The Fall Guy by Universal Pictures also finally fell out of the top 5 to the 7th position. In its 9th weekend at the box office is Alex Garland's dystopian action movie Civil War by A24. There's also Challengers by MGM and Amazon Studios. And finally is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire by Sony and Columbia Pictures. Domestically, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga earned another $4.2 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $58.7 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $21 million to bring its current international box office total up to $85.7 million. Thus, globally, the movie earned another $30 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $144.4 million. Domestically, The Fall Guy earned another $2.7 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $85.1 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $2.9 million to bring its current international box office total up to $80.5 million. So globally, the movie earned another $7.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $165.6 million. Domestically, Civil War earned another $78,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $68.6 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $119,000 to bring its current international box office total up to $45.8 million. So globally, the movie earned another $286,000 to bring its current global gross box office total up to $114.4 million. Domestically, there is no reported box office for Challengers this weekend, but the box office for last weekend was finally reported as being around $865,000, which, when combined with the roughly $545,000 that it earned during last week, brings the movie's current domestic box office total up to $49 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $2.6 million to bring its current international box office total up to $41.8 million. So globally, the movie earned another $3.1 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $90.8 million. Domestically, there is no reported box office for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire this weekend, but the box office for last weekend was finally updated as being around $243,000, which, when combined with the roughly $28,000 that the movie earned during last week, brings the movie's current domestic box office total up to $113 million. Internationally, the movie earned roughly another $360,000 to bring its current international box office total up to $88.2 million. So globally, the movie earned roughly another $632,000 to bring its current global gross box office total up to $201.2 million, and it's still only the 5th US-produced movie so far this year that's broken the $200 million mark globally. Now, to know whether these movies are going to break even or not, as well as how much money they might be losing, we need to look at their production budgets, which we can then multiply by 2.5 for a single mid-range estimated break-even point, or by both 2.5 and 3.0 for a broader estimated break-even point range. For Bad Boys Ride or Die, with its reported high production budget of $100 million, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million. For the Garfield movie, with its $60 million production budget, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $150 million to $180 million. For the movie entitled If, with its very high $110 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million. For Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, with its even higher $165 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $412.5 million to $495 million. For Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, with its very bloated $168 million production budget, we get a very high estimated break-even point range of $420 million to $504 million, which is why the movie is a huge flop. For Civil War, with its $50 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $125 million to $150 million. For Challengers, with its $55 million production budget, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of $137.5 million. For The Fall Guy, with its $125 million production budget, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of $312.5 million. And finally, for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, with its high $100 million production budget, we get an estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million. For the 3 movies that I am no longer calculating projections, which include Civil War, Challengers, and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, all of them are losing money, and their losses are as follows. For Civil War, its losses currently range from $10.6 million to $35.6 million in global gross box office revenue. For Challengers, its current losses are around $46.7 million in global gross box office revenue. And for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, its current losses range from $48.8 million to $98.8 million. So when we divide each of these movies' losses by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, we get the following losses for each of the studios. For Civil War, A24 stands to lose around $5.3 million to $17.8 million. For Challengers, MGM and Amazon Studios currently stand to lose around $23.3 million. And for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, Sony and Columbia Pictures currently stand to lose around $24.4 million to $49.4 million. And that brings us to the movies whose final domestic and global gross box office I am currently projecting, which includes Bad Boys Ride or Die, The Garfield Movie, If, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, and The Fall Guy. For Bad Boys Ride or Die, using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office for the movie may range from $140 million at the low end, $159.9 million at the mid-range, and $186.4 million at the upper end. And with the movie's current domestic share of 53.54%, I can project that the final global gross box office for the movie may range from $261.5 million at the low end, $298.7 million at the mid-range, and $348.1 million at the upper end. So given the movie's estimated break-even point range of $250 million to $300 million, it currently has a very good chance of breaking even, but if it doesn't, then its losses would likely range from $0 to $35.8 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Sony and Columbia Pictures currently stand to lose somewhere on the order of $0 to $19.3 million. For the Garfield movie, as of this weekend, the movie's current global gross box office earnings of $192.7 million have surpassed the movie's estimated break-even point range of $150 million to $180 million, so the movie has clearly made bank already. But by using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office for the movie may range from $94.2 million at the low end, $100.2 million at the mid-range, and $108.2 million at the upper end, which is a more narrow range than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 35.6%, which is slightly higher than last week's, I can project that the final global gross box office for the movie may range from $264.5 million at the low end, $281.4 million at the mid-range, and $303.8 million at the upper end, which is more narrow than last week's projection and lowers the likelihood that the movie will be able to break $300 million worldwide. Going back to the movie that's entitled If, using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $113.6 million at the low end, $118.3 million at the mid-range, and $124.5 million at the upper end, which is a more narrow range than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 58.19%, which is nearly the same as last week's, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office earnings may range from $195.2 million at the low end, $203.3 million at the mid-range, and $214 million at the upper end, which is a more narrow range than last week's projection and remains well below the movie's estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million. Thus, the movie continues to be a box office flop and may lose somewhere on the order of $61 million to $134.8 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Paramount Pictures currently stands to lose somewhere on the order of $30.5 million to $67.4 million. Going back to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, this is the fourth movie in the franchise's current form that has an average weekly drop of 34.71% and a standard deviation of 3.65% to create a range of possible average weekly drops from 31.06% to 38.36%. And using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $165.2 million at the low end, $167.8 million at the mid-range, and $170.9 million at the upper end, which is slightly lower than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 41.63%, which is still more than 2 standard deviations above the franchise's average domestic share, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office earnings may range from $396.8 million at the low end, $403 million at the mid-range, and $410.6 million at the upper end, which is yet another reversal of fortune for this movie as compared to last week, by once again indicating that the movie is probably not going to break even. So based on this week's projections and the movie's estimated break-even point range of $412.5 million to $495 million, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes currently stands to lose anywhere from $1.9 million to $98.2 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Disney and 20th Century Fox stand to potentially lose somewhere on the order of $952,000 to $49.1 million. Going back to Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie will probably range from $72.2 million at the low end, $75.4 million at the mid-range, and $79.6 million at the upper end, which is significantly lower than last week's projection. And using the movie's current domestic share of 40.65%, which is lower than last week's, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office earnings will probably range from $177.6 million at the low end, $185.5 million at the mid-range, and $195.9 million at the upper end, which is a lower projection than last week. So the probability of Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, being able to break $200 million globally has gone down, and the movie remains a huge flop with potential losses ranging from $224.1 million to $326.4 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Warner Bros. Stands to lose somewhere on the order of $112.1 million to $163.2 million. And with losses that large, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, remains the current biggest flop contender for 2024 because those potential losses are significantly higher than the losses that were amassed by Madame Web earlier this year. And finally, going back to The Fall Guy, using a possible range of average weekly draws from 30 to 40%, I can project that its final domestic box office revenue may range from $92.4 million at the low end, $94.1 million at the mid-range, and $96.3 million at the upper end, which is a more narrow range than last week's projection. And with its current domestic share of 51.39%, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office revenue may range from $179.7 million at the low end, $183 million at the mid-range, and $187.3 million at the upper end, which is lower than last week's projection. So with its estimated mid-range break-even point of $312.5 million, the movie is a flop and stands to lose somewhere on the order of $125.2 million to $132.8 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that Universal Pictures stands to lose around $62.6 million to $66.4 million. Thus, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, If, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, The Fall Guy, and Challengers all remain definite flops, Civil War remains a probable flop, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is once again a probable flop. But Bad Boys Ride or Die has a good chance of breaking even, while the Garfield Movie, Dune Part 2, Godzilla x Kong the New Empire, and Kung Fu Panda 4 have all made bank. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.